Welcome new and old friends to day 4 of our Halloween week and the finale. I hope you enjoyed all these stories so far as we end with 6 horror stories. I wanted to end this week with quite a few stories to listen to. So please remember to like, subscribe, share, and comment. All of this helps the channel quite a lot. Now, with all that being said, turn off your lights, make sure your doors and windows are locked. Things are about to get spooky. We encountered an eldritch god in the Mariana Trench by Deadbull4572. I never thought I'd be one to come face to face with an eldritch god, but there we were, deep in the Mariana Trench, on a routine mission to explore the depths of the ocean. It was part of a submarine crew, a group of highly trained individuals who were responsible for collecting data and samples to bring back to the surface. We had been exploring the trench for days, with nothing out of the ordinary happening. But on the 4th day, things started to get strange. We began to pick up strange readings on our instruments, one that we couldn't explain. At first, we thought it might be a malfunction with the equipment, but as we descended further into the trench, the readings only grew stronger. It was then that we saw it, a massive otherworldly entity that defied all description. Its body was made of twisting, withering tentacles that seemed to stretch on for miles. Its eyes were like black holes, sucking in all light and matter around them, and it emitted a sense of dread and terror that I couldn't quite comprehend. We were stunned, frozen in fear and awe. It was unlike anything we had ever seen before, and we didn't know how to react. But our training kicked in, and we quickly tried to gather as much data as we could about the creature. As we circled around it, taking readings and samples, we noticed something even more disturbing. The creature seemed to be aware of us, studying us with its unfathomable gaze. And then, with a sudden burst of movement, it lashed out with one of its tentacles, hitting our submarine and sending us reeling. The impact was so powerful that it knocked out our systems, leaving us stranded in the dark ocean. We were trapped, with no way out, and the creature continued to circle around us, almost as if taunting us. For hours we waited, hoping for a rescue team to arrive, but it became clear that we were on our own. Our supplies were running low, and the air was growing thin. But the worst part was the feeling of impending doom that hung over us. We knew that creature was still out there, waiting for us to make a move. We huddled together, trying to come up with a plan, but it was to no use. We were outmatched and outgunned, and there was no way we could take on a creature of that magnitude. And then it happened. The creature began to attack us again, this time with even more force. The submarine shook and groaned under the pressure, and I felt like we were going to be crushed to death. And then, just when I thought it was all over, the creature retreated. It disappeared back into the depths of the trench, leaving us alone and sighing in relief. We were silent for a moment, trying to process what just happened, and then, almost as if on cue, the emergency lights flickered on. We had power again, and with it, a small glimmer of hope. We quickly got to work trying to repair the damaged systems and come up with a plan to get out of there. It was a race against time, and we knew that that creature could come back at any moment. We breathed a collective sigh of relief as we pulled to the surface, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for being given a second chance at life. Looking back on that experience, I still can't explain what we saw down there, but I know that it was something beyond our understanding, something that defied all logic and reason. And as we made our way back to the safety of land, I couldn't help but wonder what other unknown creatures and mysteries lay hidden in the depths of the ocean. I knew that we had just scratched the surface, and there were still many secrets waiting to be uncovered. Every time I tell someone about the abomination, it starts pursuing them instead of me. I'm sorry, but my survival is more important to me than a bunch of strangers on YouTube. Some of the children are not really children. By Flimsy Payment 9927. I'm going to tell you something that happened to me last Halloween. I've had a hard time coming to terms with what happened, and I've only been able to trust one other person with my story. He suggests that I tell it here. I brought this up with my psychiatrist several times, and she's written it off as stress-induced acute psychosis. Let me be clear. I have no history of mental illness, although I was struggling with some lingering grief at this time. I am certain that what I witnessed was not a result of this grief. Last year, I took my children trick-or-treating like I do every year on Halloween. Unfortunately, it fell on Monday and I had to wait for the kids to get out of school before getting them ready. The days started off dreary and the misty showers continued until late afternoon, which was absolutely ideal. When 3:30 came, the kids were excited to get their costumes on and head out. They looked adorable, and their joyous anticipation was contagious. I was absolutely reeling with vicarious excitement. Halloween was my favorite, and it was pure bliss to hang out with the kids on a spooky, drizzly night. The first 30 minutes or so went as expected. The kids darted from house to house, stopped to show me the variety of candy they had collected. It was good. It was normal. Eventually, we ended up at a small house about 2 blocks down from our own. I had seen this particular house many times during my walks, but nothing about it stood out to me. It was a plain, modest-looking yellow house with virtually no lawn decorations or vegetation, other than a small lawn and a single maple tree. There was no porch light, and there didn't seem to be any lights on the house, so I told the kids we should move on to the next in case the owners were away or didn't want to be bothered. But you know how kids are. It was Halloween, and they were wired for extortion. This house may have had candy, and there was an opportunity they couldn't pass. I figured it couldn't hurt, but something in my mind told me to walk up to the front door with them instead of hanging out back near the sidewalk. They knocked modestly on the door and waited a few moments. As the door creaked open, a small elderly woman peeked into the opening and gave a light, tired-looking smile. I half expected a terrifying, devious witch, but I was pleasantly surprised to see that she was quite normal. She was probably just not that into Halloween. She placed a couple of pieces of candy into the kids' bags and nodded in response to their thanks. I smiled politely and thanked her and turned to leave when she beckoned me with a curl of her fingers. "Yes, ma'am," I replied and leaned in to hear her. "You have beautiful children, and I know you celebrate an innocent fun." Oh God, she's going to tell me about the unholy pagan occult blasphemy that is Halloween, I thought. "Some of the children out tonight are not really children." I don't know how long I stood in this woman's doorway with what had to have been the most impolite look on my face. I started to ask her if she was referring to older teenagers because I had heard people complain about that before. And it agitated me a bit because I'd be collecting candy too if it was socially acceptable. "You'll be able to see it if you pay attention. Something will be off. The portions of the limbs, the sounds of the voice. Something of them aren't children. Ma'am, I'm only telling you this because one of them is following you, she said, clearly trying to be delicate, but there was a haste in her voice. My heart sank. Sure, she was likely declining a bit cognitively, but her words shot through my veins and left behind an icy suspicion. I felt nauseous and had enough of the encounter, so I simply walked away. She's fucking crazy, I muttered to myself. Mommy, you shouldn't curse, my daughter sang, skipping towards the next house. I chose to shake off what the woman had said and continued enjoying the night with my kids. We continued this way, house to house, until I could tell their little feet had grown tired. They started dragging behind me a bit, and I decided to head back towards our house. It was a bit darker than when we started out, and the temperature dropped quite a bit. Now, we had just moved to this neighborhood about 6 months before, and I really prioritized the kids getting the opportunity to make friends. There was a few instances throughout the night that both of them saw other kids from their classes and said hello, or even walked with them for a few houses before going their separate ways. I made polite conversation with their parents and smiled and waved to the kids' friends, but I didn't explicitly remember any names or faces. So when a boy looked about my son's age called out to him from a couple houses down, I wasn't sure whether we had encountered the kid earlier in the night or not. Aiden, he waved excitedly to my son like second graders do. He looked quite a bit like my son, but lankier with long, dark hair. My son waved back shyly, as he always does, and the boy came running awkwardly over to us. Aiden, I like your Fortnite costume. Aiden looked uncomfortable, but he always kinda did when confronted with unexpected social situations. He thanked the kid and turned to walk in the direction of our house. Are you in Aiden's class? I asked, trying to sound polite even though I was dead tired. Oh no, I see him at recess, he responded excitedly. In hindsight, his gleeful giggle was a little excessive. Okay, well, we're heading home. Are your parents nearby? I asked with general concern, since I didn't see any families around anymore. He started nervously. I don't see my dad now, but he must be weighing down the block towards my house. He pointed in the direction we were going. I'll walk with you until we get there, he declared instead of asking. So we continued walking, the kids chatting among themselves. Well, more so my daughter asking Aiden's recess friend a plethora of questions, and he answered with short answers and frequent giggles that began to sound more and more forced. Aiden looked as uncomfortable as ever, and I realized just how tired my feet were, just how dark it had gotten. The drizzle had stopped, but a mist lingered in the air, making the air heavy. Mommy, what did the lady say to you at the yellow house? My daughter asked. Nothing, baby. She was complaining about teenagers. Mommy? Yes, baby. I was exhausted. My daughter lowered her voice to a whisper. I've never seen him at recess. I don't think Aiden has either. He didn't even know the name of our school, and we've been walking for a very long time. When will we be home? Honey, I checked my phone. How was this the first time I checked my phone? 11:54. Fuck. What the fuck? Mommy, I'm scared. I want to go home. My heart began to race, and my legs turned to jelly. Guys, when did it get so late? I looked at the little boy standing in front of us. his face shifting continuously back and forth from the excited and nervous smile he had shown at first to a solemn and indifferent stare, then to a manic sneer of duper's delight. This experience kept looping from one to the next to the last, over and over. It felt overwhelmingly strenuous to look away, but the sound of fear in my children's voices was enough to sober me for longer stretches of time. I closed my eyes tight, gripping both of their arms tightly. "Aubrey, Mommy's confused. Tell me what's going on." "We kept trying to walk and you kept stopping and staring at him. We kept yelling for you to stop. Please, Mommy, I want to go home." With my eyes shut tight, my hands gripping their arms tightly, I shouted, "What the fuck are you? What do you want?" His voice was shrill and distorted. "Spare 5 minutes more. We're nearly there now. I've gotten to know you so deeply, Catherine." I could feel the vomit rising in my throat and my chest was on fire. I wasn't confident that my legs could carry me. "Guys, run home. Now, I'll follow." My brave and gallant babies obliged. "Don't leave this unfinished. You'll force me to show up again." I ran as fast as I ever had to catch up to the kids and pull them inside our home. I said this at the beginning, and I'll say it again. Almost nobody believes me about this. My kids knew something was wrong with Mommy, and something was off about the boy, but they aren't able to quite put it together, and honestly, neither am I. I'm sharing this because I may save someone's life. I don't know what this entity is, but it looks very much like a child, and it completely removes you from reality. If you encounter a child you don't know on Halloween this year, look for signs that something's off. The limbs, the voice, the demeanor. If anything feels wrong, do not engage. Something was left unfinished that night, and I believe it's coming back for me. I thought I would have the usual mild annoyance that comes with looking for something in IKEA. And with not finding the entrance and exit as normal, it seems like I'm walking through the same place over and over. But there really aren't any walls, and the staff are creeping me out. Never buy a Halloween mask from a yard sale. You could be getting more than you bargained for. By Horror Writer 1717, aka Michael Kelso. I always loved taking my little 8-year-old daughter Chrissy trick-or-treating ever since she was old enough to walk. I dressed her up like a ballerina or a princess or whatever cute character would draw the most smiles and "Oh, aren't you adorable" comments. If I had known how things were going to end, I never would have taken her trick-or-treating in her entire life. It had started in late September when I hadn't picked out an outfit for Chrissy yet. We were hitting the end of the season's yard sales, and the neighbor had told me that one we were going to had lots of Halloween costumes. When we got there, I discovered she wasn't kidding. The one side of her garage was nothing but costumes hanging on racks. I wondered why there were so many when I checked out the prices. Mystery solved. Her prices were only a few dollars less than the department store. Why do people do that, assuming that their stuff that's been sitting around in their attic or garage is worth so much? I made a polite show of looking through the outfits in hopes that I would stumble across something cute and cheap. Although, with the rest of the prices being so high, anything cheap would be immediately suspect. As I was searching in vain, Chrissy came to me holding a mask. "Look, Mommy," she said. "I can go as a witch this year." I looked at the mask of an old woman's grotesque face. "Is that really what you want to go as?" I said. "Why not a princess?" "Oh, Mom, I go as a princess every year." "How about a unicorn?" "I just really want to go as a witch this year." I sighed, holding the unicorn outfit in my hand and looking into her pleading eyes. "Please." "All right," I said, putting the unicorn back and digging out the rest of the witch outfit. In the end, it saved me $10. I guess the witch wasn't selling well. I wish with everything in me that I could return that $10 and do everything that happened. We walked up to the old woman, Miss Henderson, who was selling the clothes and paid for the outfit. It struck me as we walked out how much her face reminded me of the mask. We were barely in the door at home until Chrissy ran off with the outfit to try it on. I carried in the rest of my yard sale finds and set them down to find places for them later. I turned around and my heart skipped a beat as a tiny witch stood staring at me. "Oh, Chrissy," I said, "you nearly scared the life out of me." "I'm sorry, Mommy," she said, but it wasn't Chrissy's voice that came out. It sounded higher pitched and garbled. "I see the mask has a little bonus to it," I said. "That's not all," she said in her modified high-pitched garble. "Looking through it's really cool too." It was a little disturbing hearing the voice, but knowing it was my daughter saying the words. If she were older, I'm sure she would use this to scare me several times before Halloween came around. "Let me see," I said. She had a little difficulty taking the mask off, but when she did, I put it on and looked through the red lens that were sewn in. It made the world look a lot different. Not just the color, but there seemed to be an aura around objects. I shrugged it off and lunged at Chrissy, saying, "Boo!" She jumped and squealed as I chased her around the table. "I'll get you, my pretty," I said as I chased her into the living room. She dove onto the couch and tried to hide behind some pillows. I slowly circled the couch, closing in for the kill, when I saw something dart away out of the corner of my eye. I didn't think she could move that fast, but I pursued the new target down the hallway towards the bedrooms. "Mommy, where are you going?" I heard Chrissy say behind me. I pulled off the mask and she was standing in the living room by the couch watching me. I glanced back at the hallway and shrugged it off. It must have been my imagination. I went back into the living room and gave her the mask. "Are you sure you'll be able to see in that thing on a dark Halloween night?" I said. "It's okay, Mommy," she said. "There's plenty of streetlights, and besides, you'll be there with me." "Oh, yes," I said. "I almost forgot." She smiled and hugged me, then grabbed the mask and skipped away happily. Over the next week, she took the time to scare me with it on a daily basis. It got to the point where I had to threaten to take it away from her. I still caught her wearing it quite often. With Halloween quickly approaching, I could barely keep the thing off her head. Finally, the big night came. Chrissy was bouncing off the wall with excitement. She was dressed in her costume and ready to go an hour before trick-or-treat even started. All through the day, I'd been keeping an eye on the storm clouds that were brewing, threatening to put a damper on our fun. But until evening rolled around, they had blown off and left a nice evening that wasn't too warm or too cool. We left the house, making sure to leave our porch light off so not to tease any trick-or-treaters with a false pretense of candy at our house. We started down the dark street lit by the occasional street light. At first, Chrissy is pulling on me like a dog straining against a leash to get to the first house. But as we walked, she drew closer to me. The first house was everything you expected. the nice woman who answered the door asked. "And what are you supposed to be?"
"I'm a witch,"
was Chrissy's enthusiastic response. But being said through whatever filter was in that mask made the woman jump. "Oh my," she said. "That's quite a costume." She politely held out the bowl for Chrissy to choose 2 candies from, then disappeared back into her house. We hadn't seen but a few other trick-or-treaters until we turned onto the main street, and they seemed to be everywhere, dodging back and forth across the street. They wore every kind of costume you could think of, from the classic ghosts to cartoon characters to zombies to princesses. I looked wistfully at the princess when the little witch holding my hand suddenly pulled against me. "What's wrong, sweetie?" I said as she huddled close to me.
"I'm scared, Mommy,"
she said in that high-pitched screeching voice the mask somehow produced. "Of what, baby?"
"The monsters."
I looked and there was a zombie, Frankenstein, and a werewolf walking together towards us up the street. "Baby, they're just costumes," I said, "just like every other year."
"Are you sure?"
she said, her death grip on my hand loosening just a bit. "Of course, honey," I said. "Everyone's just dressed up to have fun, just like you. Don't you think some other little girls will look at you and be scared of the witch?" The grip loosened to normal.
"I guess so."
We started down the street, following along with a crowd of superheroes and other colorful characters. The more houses we went to, the more she seemed to relax and enjoy herself. There were still a few times when she would walk so close to me that she almost tripped me, mostly when there were large groups coming towards us. Frankly, I was surprised she could see much of anything out of that mask. There were a few spots where the streetlights were further apart, and I struggled to see the sidewalk. On the whole, though, the evening had been going well. Her bag was filling with candy, and everyone seemed to like her outfit. We even came to Miss Henderson's house, the woman who had sold it to us. When we stood at the end of her walkway, Chrissy hesitated.
"Are you sure the monsters are pretend?"
she said, looking up at me with that disturbing mask. "Of course, sweetie. Go on up to the door." A group was just leaving as Chrissy walked up.
"Ah, I see my costume has come home,"
Miss Henderson said, dressed as a witch herself and sounding much like the voice the mask made.
"Trick or treat,"
Chrissy said. She stared at her for a moment as Chrissy seemed to stare at nothing on the porch beside the woman. She glanced over at the empty porch and leaned down to whisper something to Chrissy's ear while she held out the candy bowl. Chrissy nodded her head as she grabbed 2 pieces of candy and darted away from the woman. I smiled and we walked towards the next house. As soon as we were out of sight, I pulled her aside. "What did that woman say to you, Chrissy?" I said. For a long moment, the tiny witch eyes stared at me silently.
She asked me if I liked the mask,"
she said. I looked into those red plastic lenses, completely unable to tell if what she said was the truth. I paused and took a deep breath. "I think maybe we've had enough trick-or-treating for the night," I said.
"I think so too,"
she said, much to my surprise.
"Can we go home now?"
I looked at her half-full bag of candy that didn't have nearly as much in it as the other Halloweens, but she'd been acting odd the whole time. "Sure, sweetie," I said, smiling. "Let's head home." We crossed to the other side of the street at Chrissy's urging, so we wouldn't have to go near the woman's house again. Either it was my imagination or we made it home more quickly than I expected. I was nearly out of breath when we opened the door and Chrissy dove inside, ripping off the mask and costume. She ran to her room and changed into her pajamas, then came back out and gave the costume and mask a wide berth as she went to the couch. It's not quite bedtime yet. Do you want to watch something on TV? I said. No, I'm pretty tired, she said. I think I'll go to bed. Good night, Mommy. She started towards her bedroom. Don't you want any of your candy? She looked from me to the bag of candy sitting on the end of the table. I'll have some tomorrow, she said. What about your costume? She stared at a line on the floor. I don't want it anymore, she said, and then went to her room and shut the door. I stared at her as she went. I couldn't imagine when she wouldn't dive into her candy. Usually I had to limit her so she wouldn't go to bed with a sugar high. I stepped over and picked up the costume, sighing at the wasted money, but happy she enjoyed it, if only for a little while. I walked over to the trash can and threw the costume in. As I held the mask, I felt like I had to look through it one more time. I put it over my head and the world was instantly bathed in red. I looked around and for whatever reason, the aura surrounding objects seemed brighter. I was about to take it off when I saw something dart off to the side. I ripped the mask off and looked where I had seen the movement, but nothing was there. I tossed the mask into the garbage and did a slow lap around the room, searching for anyone who may have been trying to play a prank on me like a certain little former witch. I smiled as I looked from hiding place to hiding place, knowing she was trying to sneak up on me and scare me. It was the only thing that made sense. She had passed up on the candy and her precious costume to throw me off guard so she could sneak up on me and give me a Halloween scare. I finished my circle through the room without fighting her, then ended up by the locked front door. I made my way back to the hall expecting to be surprised at any moment. My biggest surprise was that it never came. I stood in front of Chrissy's door and slowly opened it, peeking inside. I saw her fast asleep, or doing an excellent job of faking being asleep. I shrugged it off and went to my bedroom. My head hit the pillow, and I was soon fast asleep. I woke up in the middle of the night knowing something was wrong. I sat bolt upright and scanned the room. Beside my bed stood a shadowy figure. My heart froze as I went into full panic mode. Someone was in the house, and they were standing beside my bed. I threw myself to the other side of the bed and fumbled for the light. When I turned it on, I saw Chrissy standing there wearing the witch mask. It took a minute to let my heart return to normal before I said, "Chrissy, honey, you scared me," I said. She didn't reply. She just stood there still as a statue. I had to watch her chest rise and fall just to be sure she was still breathing. "Chrissy, why did you get the mask out of the garbage?" She didn't move. "Chrissy, honey, why don't you take off that mask and go back to bed?" She remained still. I slowly crawled across the bed and stood beside her. My hand hesitantly reached towards her and pulled off the mask. To my surprise, her eyes were closed. It was as if she was still asleep. "Chrissy?" I said gently, rubbing her shoulder. Her eyes fluttered open and she looked at me. "Why did you wake me up, Mommy?" she said. "You were sleepwalking, baby." "I was?" "You took the mask out of the garbage and put it on, then walked to my room." "I don't remember that." "That's how sleepwalking works, baby. Usually don't remember." "I'm tired. I'm going back to bed now." I kissed her forehead. "You sleep good now," I said. She walked down my room, leaving me holding the mask. It stared at me with its empty red eyes, making me feel more than a little uncomfortable. I leaned down and put it in my bottom nightstand drawer, then turned off the light and tried to go back to sleep. But sleep did not come easily. I tossed and turned for hours. Every time I would drift off, a vision of the mask would invade my dreams, and I would be startled awake, absolutely certain that someone had just been in my room. But each time the room was empty. No sleepwalking Chrissy, no villainous stranger hovering over me. When morning came around, I stumbled for the coffee maker to try to get myself moving.
"Morning, Mommy,"
Chrissy said cheerfully, sitting on the kitchen table watching TV while eating a bowl of cereal. I mumbled something like morning as I stumbled through making a fresh pot of coffee, mixing it extra strong.
"Didn't you sleep good, Mommy?"
she said in her cheerful little voice.
"No, I didn't, thanks to a certain little visitor in the middle of the night,"
I said, trying to keep the edge out of my voice.
"Who?"
"You," I said. "You came into my room in the middle of the night, wearing and scaring me nearly half to death." Her little brow furrowed.
"I didn't get out of bed at all last night, Mommy."
"Yes, you did, Chrissy," I said. "You dug that witch mask out of the garbage and wore it into my room."
"You threw my mask in the garbage?"
"Yes, I did," I said slowly. "I thought it scared you so bad you didn't want it anymore." Her eyes became unfocused as she seemed deep in thought.
"Maybe I just was tired last night. I didn't want you to get rid of my mask."
"Then how did you?" I said as a news flash came over the TV.
In local news, a 63-year-old Martha Henderson was found dead this morning. Police are investigating, but it appears someone broke into the woman's house late last night and assaulted her. She was pronounced dead this morning by the coroner. The cause of death? Multiple stab wounds.
A picture of the woman flashed up on the screen.
"Look, Mommy, the lady we bought the mask from,"
Chrissy said. It hadn't dawned on me until she pointed it out, but she was right. The lady from the yard sale, who lived only a short walk away, was brutally stabbed to death last night. I thought back to Chrissy standing in my bedroom and shuddered at the fact that some crazy killer could have been hovering over me, or even worse, hovering over Chrissy last night. I shook the thoughts away as I glanced at the clock.
"Hurry, honey," I said. "You'll be late for the bus."
I went to the door as she gathered her book bag. When I got there, a shock awaited me.
"Chrissy, did you unlock the door this morning?"
I said.
"No, Mommy. Why?"
"No reason," I said, smiling as I pushed open the door that had not only been unlocked, but slightly ajar. We stepped out into the cool November morning air, streetlights still glowing as the sun fought to rise over the horizon. I pulled her jacket tight around her and zipped it up.
"You have a great day at school," I said as the bus pulled up.
"I will, Mommy," she said with that infectious smile. The bus slowed to a stop and Chrissy waited in line with the other kids to get on and be carried away to school. I waved as it drove away, glancing at the other mothers. Usually there would be some idle chit-chat between some, but today everyone quickly dispersed back to their houses. I told myself it was because of the cold, but I knew they were all thinking the same thing as me. There's a murderer running loose around our neighborhood. Everyone was getting back inside their house as quickly as possible and double locking their doors. I stepped through my own door and examined the lock as if it had somehow betrayed us. I locked and unlocked it several times to make sure it worked, and then, once I was satisfied, I closed it and locked it. I changed my work clothes of a dress shirt and jogging pants, then sat down at my laptop. Telecommunications had been both a blessing and a curse. Staying home was great for a while, but soon I began craving actual face-to-face social interaction. Video meetings on the computer just weren't the same, and after the shocking news this morning, I wasn't feeling very secure at home. I would have felt better around other people. The day seemed to drag on as I found myself often distracted by shooting furtive looks towards the window as I expected someone to crash through one and murder me at any moment. I found myself coasting through the day, fighting to keep my focus on my job. When the knock came at the door, I nearly jumped out of my skin. I approached it slowly as if I was about to be attacked. When I looked out the peephole, there was no one there. A chill ran down my spine when there was another knock just as I turned away. I stared at the door knowing no one was on the other side and wondering what kind of supernatural dream state I had fallen into. Was I asleep at my keyboard and having a nightmare? The knock sounded again, but this time there came a voice with it.
"Mommy, why is the door locked?"
Chrissy said. I stepped back to the peephole and looked out. There stood Chrissy. I unlocked and ripped the door open so fast she jumped back.
"Why weren't you outside waiting for me?"
she said with betrayal reflecting in her eyes. I glanced over at the wall clock and sure enough, it was time for her to be home. "I'm so sorry, sweetie," I said. "Mommy must have gotten busy and time got away."
"Why did you lock the door?"
"I felt like locking it." She looked at me with this odd, knowing look.
"Was it about the lady who got killed?"
"Maybe," I said, trying to be non-committal.
"Do you think whoever did it is still around?"
she said, as if she was just asking if it was going to rain tomorrow. "Are you hungry?" I said. "Let's get a snack." I spent the rest of the evening helping with her spelling words and playing games. It was a wonderful time. After supper, we watched her favorite show and then went to bed.
"Good night, Mommy,"
she said as I tucked her in.
"Don't be afraid. Everything will be all right."
I considered asking what she meant, but in the end, all I did was smile and say, "I know," while I stroked her hair. If only I'd known. I woke up in the middle of the night, startled again by Chrissy standing at my bedside.
"Oh, Chrissy, you need to stop scaring Mommy like that,"
I said, looking into the eyes of the mask she was wearing. "Wait a minute."
"Chrissy,"
I said slowly,
"how did you get that mask back?"
She didn't answer me for a long moment.
"My friends gave it to me."
"What friends, honey?"
"The same ones I saw on the street on Halloween,"
she said.
"The ones you said were just pretending to be monsters."
A chill ran down my spine. "When did you talk to these friends last?"
"Tonight, when they gave me the mask back,"
she said.
"They're not happy that you keep throwing it away."
I took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. "I threw it away because Halloween is over."
"Not for them,"
she said.
"They dress in their costumes all the time."
"The monster costumes?" She nodded. "And you can see them in their monster costumes?" I said slowly.
"Only when I wear the mask."
My hand darted out and tried to grab the mask and take it off her, but she dodged and backed away. I heard a high-pitched cackle come from the mask, remembering how it changed her voice.
"They said you might try that,"
she said.
"They told me about a fun game we can play."
She skipped away as I jumped out of my bed and followed her. She ran down the hall to her room and darted inside. I peeked around the corner, not sure what I would find. Chrissy was standing on the other side of her bed, looking at me through that horrid mask.
"They gave me some fun new toys to play this game with,"
she said, reaching under her pillow and pulled out 2 butcher knives that looked like mini swords in her little hands that barely wrapped around the handles. My eyes grew wide. "What if I don't want to play this game?" I said. She looked off to the side as if seeing something I couldn't.
They said they wouldn't like that at all,
she said, lowering her voice.
It would make them angry.
I glanced in the direction she was looking, but didn't see anything. Just then, Chrissy jumped up on her bed and dove at me, swinging the knives. I was caught completely off guard. One of the knives caught my forearm and slashed a long gash in it. "Chrissy!" I yelled, but she was still coming at me, swinging the knives.
Come on, Mommy, play!
She said in a maniacally high-pitched, masked voice. I dove to the side, feeling knives slice my forehead, then ran out of her room into the kitchen. "You hurt Mommy," I said as I ran.
Don't worry, Mommy,
she said.
It's just like a video game. After you die, you respawn.
I couldn't believe what I was hearing. There was something that mask was doing to her. I had to get it off her any way I could. Once in the kitchen, I glanced around for anything I could use. My eyes fell briefly on the knife block that still held several steak knives. The thought was fleeting, and I quickly dismissed it. I was fighting the mask, not my daughter. I had to make sure I didn't hurt her. Quickly searching, I found a dish towel and grabbed it just in the nick of time as Chrissy came charging into the kitchen. She swung at me with one of the knives, and I was able to block it with the towel, but it had cut partway through. I quickly wrapped the remaining towel around the knife and pulled it out of her grip. She stumbled and fell to the floor. I was on top of her in an instant. She kicked and flailed, swinging the remaining knife at me, just missing my face by inches. I blocked the knife with my already bleeding arm and used the other arm to rip it out of her grip. It wasn't easy as it should have been. She had some supernatural strength. Eventually, I was able to pull it free. I reached for the mask, but suddenly something grabbed my hair and yanked me backwards. I rolled over and got up, but nothing was there. At least, nothing I could see. Chrissy jumped up and grabbed two of the steak knives from the block and started chasing around the kitchen table. It would have been comical, just like we had done many other times, chasing each other and laughing. But no one was laughing now, and my life was on the line. A kitchen chair moved itself in my way, making me trip and fall. I jumped back up before she got to me, but I felt something brush against the back of my leg. I glanced back, and she had sliced a gash in my leg. We continued around the table, but I knew I had to go somewhere I could use open space to run away and get some distance between us.
You're not as fun as Miss Henderson was,
I heard the mask say.
She screamed and begged like a good little girl. She didn't run like you.
The shock hit me like a sledgehammer. The mask had used my daughter to kill the neighbor. I knew now more than ever I had to get this thing off her and destroy it. I ran out the front door, not even thinking that I was only wearing a nightshirt and underwear. I knew I needed help. I ran to the next door neighbor's house and beat on the door, yelling for help. Chrissy burst out of our house and saw me, then ran after me. I went to the next neighbor and beat on their door, then the next, all the while a little girl wearing a homicidal mask chasing me. After 3 houses, people started to come out to see what was going on. I doubled back to where a few of my neighbors had gathered. "Help me," I said. "I need to get that mask off her." They looked from me to a charging Chrissy, holding 2 knives. I ran away and the neighbors parted like the Red Sea. There was a tree in our yard that had branches low enough to climb, but Chrissy hadn't been able to reach them yet. I climbed up, my bare feet slipping on the bark as I tried to make it out of reach. She came at me so fast I knew I wouldn't make it, and I'd be a sitting duck for her to slice and dice. At the last moment, my feet gained enough traction to get up to the first branch. She jumped and slashed at me, but all the blades cut was thin air. She stood under the branches, jumping and slashing at me in vain. She was still doing it when the police arrived and took her away. I jumped down, nearly tangling myself in the branch, and ran after the police. "Wait, please, that's my daughter," I said. They had restrained and disarmed her, but not taken off the mask. I pulled it off with much more effort than it should have taken and thrown it as far away from her as I could. When it was finally off, Chrissy's eyes searched around as if waking from a dream. Her eyes landed on me. "Mommy?" she said. "Yes, sweetie," I said, wrapping her in a big hug. Ma'am," one of the officers said. "Are you sure that's wise? This girl was trying to kill you." "It wasn't her, it was that thing," I said, pointing at the mask, but it was gone. I visit her every day in the mental hospital. The staff there are quite fond of her and say she's the most delightful patient they ever had. None of them believe why she's there. They all say it must be some mistake. I know it was too. It was a mistake to ever buy that mask. "The police are finally here," I said, rushing to unlock the safe room's door. Through the phone, I heard the dispatcher say, "Ma'am, the police are still 5 minutes out," just as the door began to creak open. The Forgotten Room by Verrgasm. My father once told me, in one of our rare familiar moments of sincerity, that the men he sentenced to die were lower than even the filthiest disease-ridden vermin, that by punishing them so severely, he was in fact performing a divine service. A service not simply in honor of the crown, but unto God himself. Ours was claimed to be a domain which belonged to the Lord, and therefore to the English Empire. It is in my opinion that he did generally believe in such rhetoric with all of his heart, which surely is a testament to how he was able to find restful slumber in the night, year after year, as the wails of the damned permeated the castle walls. All the while, beyond the confines of our home, hundreds more were slain by the day under similar such orders. It is with this testimony, which I give according to nothing more than my own free will and insurmountable and eternal guilt, that I hope to dispose my father's sterling reputation among the populace, that I may bring forth into light and make known the horrendous truth of his deeds to the fullest possible extent, so that people will know that they do not revere a stellar hero of war and battle, but instead a calculous monster most vile and wicked. My sworn mission throughout the remainder of my life shall be to purge the contrived collective memory which has been erroneously constructed around my father, following his death some 6 years ago to this day upon writing. This is my confession, as both a still patriotic subject of the crown, and as a remorseful human being under God's watchful sight. My soul cannot find respite beneath the weight of what I have seen. The burden is simply too great. Throughout my childhood years spent sequestered within the castle, living by my father's outsourced care, I recall that a tremendous effort was made to keep me firmly away from the carnage of the orders handed out during those dark times. Whether this was done out of some obscure parental love which I never truly saw, or if it was simply to assuage the doubt possibly simmering in the background of his own fanaticism, I shall never know. But I was consistently and relentlessly refused from venturing too far into certain areas of the property. In fact, the very presence of the dungeon complex itself escaped my naive perception until I was already a man of 15 years. At which point, owing to a tempestuous resolve of young rebellion, I found myself sneaking beyond my father's ever-present grasp as night fell and the guards became less vigilant. The excursions were only slight at first. I would make trips to the pantry where I would prepare my own food, a joy which I maintain to this day. Or I would venture into the courtyard to gaze at the stars above,
and marvel at the complexity of the infinite. It was there, looking upwards into the twinkling perpetual beauty, that I first began to unravel the frightful revelation which would kill that sense of wonder within me forevermore. I would hear the muffled groans, the wailing, the screams. They were somewhat sporadic, but ultimately undeniable, and so wildly apparent in their abject suffering. So I stopped making trips to the courtyard entirely, unable to stomach the frightening calls for mercy from which I knew not where they came. At first, and it does embarrass me so to make my naivety known in such a public way as this, but I thought perhaps the castle may be inhabited by a number of restless spirits. I shall never forget my father's response when I brought those concerns to him in child earnestness. He bellowed, laughing and without the slightest remorse, that those old ghosts were no longer in a position to harm any decent folk in any way anymore. They are to be forgotten, like any other such refuse. It became clear that the answers I was in search of would not come from the mouths of my father nor his sympathetic entourage, and so I foolishly set out to uncover the source of those distressing sounds on my own, an endeavor of which, shameful I might add, I often find myself regretful of as I lay awake at night. Had I never seen such atrocities being carried out firsthand, had I even been simply informed of them as my father was, without the sight of the truly unignorable brutality laid bare, perhaps I might even be in my father's place today, lecturing in the flimsy justified carnage being wrought on our northern neighbors still, just as he was for all those terrible years. Ignorance, I have learned, can be and often is a blissful experience, especially for one in a position of an unyielding, supposedly God-given authority. In the glow of an imposing full moon, I began my descent into the bowels of hell, constructed of grimy stone and iron bars, and with each step, the cries became all the more real. At the bottom of the stairs, a long corridor met my shuddering acquaintance, one with doorways of splintering wood on both sides, accumulating in a single darkened chamber at the end which laid open. My footsteps seemed to carry into forever, echoing over the sobs of the broken on either side as I struggled with my nerves after reaching each closed doorway. In my fright, the will to face what lay on the other side of them became even weaker, until I had found myself at the very end, peering through the darkness of the only chamber door left open. Silence seemed to inhabit its small space, quite unlike all the others, which so clearly homed to grunted and groaned suffering, muffled beneath indifferent wood and stone and steel. With a shaking hand, I pulled a still glowing lantern from its rusty hook and paced ever so carefully inside, where I was met by a wooden hatch placed upon the center of the floor. A whimper escaped my lips as I gripped the heavy handle with my free hand and slowly pulled upwards until what lay beneath became undeniable. A mass of pale, lacerated, bruised flesh laid square off beneath me, trapped firmly within the cramped shaft-like space. Arms withered languidly. A balding, scraggly-haired head protruded from the very center. Even a foot poked up above the rest, crammed inside the cramped passage leading straight down into God only knows where. The toes on the foot curled, the sight of what filled me with such unimaginable horror that I was unable to maintain what little composure remained within me.
My startled yells provoked those jammed inside, rousing them into fits of wails which became various pleas for immediate death. The man, whose head was at the surface, craned his neck to face me, before recoiling from the brightness of the lantern clutched ever tightly to my chest. Finally, after what seemed like a millennia of terror, I fled like a coward back to the safety of my bed chamber, where I found not rest, but near madness. The following morning, as the sun began to rise, I raided the pantry for some meager supplies and appropriated a horse from the stables. Then, I abandoned my duties and began my journey to the shores of France, where I still reside to this day. I shall never forget the look on the face of the man trapped in that hellish abyss. His glassy white eyes haunt me, now and forever. They were the eyes of the damned, forgotten and cursed beyond any punishment that could ever be deemed appropriate by a society still governed by something resembling humanity. When I think back to those innocent years, before the hidden barbarity of my family and countrymen became so painfully apparent to me, I can still find no pleasure even in those happiest of memories. They are soiled, indeemably drenched in blood. While I ate plentiful and slept soundly and learned from my mentors with such youthful enthusiasm, beneath my very feet at any given time, scores of men and women alike were being subjected to torture, not even befitting any possible conception of the underworld. It is in this that I know that when death comes for me, as it did my father, there is only one place fit for a complicit coward, such as myself. The place is below, deep below, where the sun does not even shine, and the air is fetid and damp and filled with anguish. Although I pray night and day for forgiveness, I accept none. I accept my inevitable damnation. So should any other who knows anything of what has been described here and did nothing as I did. Our fates are already sealed in eternity. I waved at the cruise ship as it carried my parents away, holding back the tears as I did so. It was dark though, so nobody saw me, and soon I was alone in the seemingly depthless dark ocean. The real reason I don't look at my reflection in the mirrors in the dark anymore. By Andy A. Adams. I think we all know the legend of Bloody Mary, a beautiful yet vain and self-obsessed girl who lived in a small village. But in case you don't, it is said that she would spend hours upon hours just admiring herself in the mirror each day, until one day, when a tragic accident happened that left Mary disfigured beyond recognition. Unable to bear the sight of her own reflection anymore, and consumed with grief and self-hatred, Mary was but a former shell of herself. Years went by, and Mary became consumed by her new obsession, revenge against the mirror that once held her beauty. So one night, she lit a candle and stood in front of the mirror, chanting, "Bloody Mary," she said, referring to herself and looking at that hideous girl who was looking back. "Bloody Mary," she chanted again, this time angrier, more desperate. "Bloody Mary." But at the third chant parted her lips. Instead of the brutally scarred woman, what was looking back at her was a twisted, grotesque, vengeful creature. And now, Legends go that if you stand in the mirror in the dark, holding a candle, you'll see Mary, and she will seek to extract her revenge on you. Now, I'm not superstitious, but I don't go looking for trouble either. So I never really chanted Bloody Mary in the mirror holding a candle. But what I have done before, and solemnly thought twice about, was walk around the house in the dark holding a candle. You know, power goes out, you light a candle. Romantic setting, light a candle. Ominous, eerie Halloween party, light a candle. That sort of thing. In my walking around the house shenanigans, it happened, maybe once or twice, that I'd pass a mirror. Never paid much attention to it, although, looking back, I can't remember if I've ever checked my reflection before or not. Except, one time, I definitely did. We had just moved into a new home a few days back. My husband had to go out of town, so it was just me and the dog. I was upstairs unpacking boxes, sorting things. You know how it goes when you just move into a new place. The work never ends. As I was going from room to room, from upstairs to downstairs and back, constantly moving heavy stuff from one place to another, I left plenty of lights on around the house to facilitate my toings and froings. I guess that's what must have triggered it, because at some point, when I plugged my phone in to charge it, the power switch went off. "Damn it," I said, knowing the switch was all the way in the basement and my phone was at 2%. Luckily, I had some candles laying around in one of the boxes, and just enough juice in my phone to find them. Also, luckily, I had packed the lighters with the candles. Yay for organizational skills. I lit one of those long, thick IKEA candles. I remember it even now. It was red, burgundy red, like blood, and went down the stairs. The house had a huge mirror just at the entrance, on the left, covering the whole wall. This mirror would also greet you as you came down the stairs, as the staircase was also positioned at the entrance, but on the right-hand side. So, as I descended with my lit bloody red candle, I came face to face with the wall-sized mirror. There was no way to not look at my reflection, save for closing my eyes. Not that it was a concern at the time. As I was coming down the stairs, I noticed something off on my neck, so I stepped up to the mirror for a closer look. Initially, I couldn't spot anything, but as seconds went by, I felt like my reflection was distorting. I moved about, and sure enough, the reflection did too, but it was grinning in a way that I felt my face wasn't grinning in reality. I puckered my lips, and the reflection puckered its lips also, but the grin somehow remained. I realized the weird grin wasn't coming from my lips, but rather, it was imprinted in the reflection's eyes. I tried looking away, but I struggled to find the willpower. All my brain wanted to do was stare at my reflection, and the more I did, the more distorted it was becoming. The eyes, they were becoming larger, and the mouth was now contorted in a way that mine was certainly not. And it was moving closer, even though I was definitely frozen in place. It wasn't walking as much as it was zooming in with crazy eyes and grinning, and even though its lips weren't moving, it was laughing, at least in my head. In that moment, I felt like I was experiencing sleep paralysis, but fully awake and vertical. The more I looked, the more I did not recognize myself anymore. The person, or rather, the thing staring back at me, was disfigured beyond recognition. Was it Mary, I wondered? Its eyes were bulging out, mouth open and sucked in. It lifted a hand. It did a come hither motion with the index finger. I felt compelled to step closer. "Die," it said, making my heart pump out of my chest. "Die, die, die." My heart felt like it was going to explode. That's when my dog came running and barking from upstairs, startling me and releasing me from the grip the mirror had previously held on me. The reflection was now my own again. For the brief second I looked, I didn't dare look for longer. I shut my eyes as I ran towards the basement door. I flipped the switch and covered the mirror that very night. The next day, when my husband returned, I asked him to remove it, so he placed it in the attic. I never told him why, just said I didn't like how it looks. I never figured out if it was that particular mirror, or if this happens when you hold a candle in the mirror, if that was Mary, if I was cursed, if the candle needs to be read. I have so many questions that I never intend to find out the answers to. What I know is that I no longer look at a reflection in the dark. Not in a mirror, nor in a glass door, not even without a candle. The note read, "Please make sure the cats are fed, their water is changed often, and they get plenty of love." "A bit too late for that," I whispered as the paramedics lowered the body of my brother down from the ceiling fan, his feet having been chewed down to mangled stumps. Black Water by Darkheroxx. As I walked through the old apartment building, I let out a frustrated sigh. My brother-in-law owns this place, and he's proud to brag about how much money he's made since raising the rent here. The guy is a jerk, and yet I'm working maintenance for him. I'm not even a maintenance man. I just look up how to fix things on YouTube. He pays me well enough for me to be content, and I'm cheap enough for him to save some money. Today's job seems plenty easy enough. A little old lady at 3B needs her bathtub fixed. In my mind, it sounds just like a clog or something, but she complained to my brother-in-law that it was something much worse. He threw a tantrum about it. But if it's just a clog, fine, easy cash for me. I got to 3B and knocked on the door. After a minute or so, the door creaked open, and in front of me was an older woman. She was hunched over with long white hair and wearing a dark purple dress. Her nose was long and hooked at the tip, and she gave me a smile with a few missing teeth. I held back laughter as I imagined her flying around on a broomstick. I straightened up and introduced myself, to which she grabbed my hand to greet me. Her hands were soft and warm. For a second, I remember my grandmother. She pulled me inside of her home and led me to the bathroom. I took quick glances around the place as I followed her. The place was filthy, with piles of full trash bags lining the wall. The air had a rotting odor within it and got stronger as I continued to walk with the lady. We reached a door, and as she opened it, I was hit with a putrid stench. The old lady seemed unfazed, but I was gagging. She turned to me and asked me if I was okay. I coughed a bit more, and after a minute, I managed to compose myself. I assured her I'll get things fixed and walked into the room. The bathroom was small. Just like the rest of the apartments, it hadn't been cleaned in ages. I looked at the bathtub, and the bottom was filled with about 6 inches of jet black water. I set my tool bag onto the floor and rummaged inside to find my drain auger. I set the tip of the long coil into the dark water where I thought the drain would be. There was no resistance, but the coil sank deeper and deeper. I began to slowly crank the auger and the coil twisted, but the water still motionless. Confused, I tried to retract the drain auger, but it wasn't coming up. I stood up and pulled, but there was no give. I let out a sigh as I rolled up my left sleeve. I got on my knees beside the tub. The smell was absolutely horrendous.
I cleared my mind and plunged my left arm into the dark water. My hand went through. The water felt like sludge, as if I was putting my hand through ink and it was ice cold. I pushed down and noticed that I had submerged most of my forearm inside the water. There was no way this tub was that deep. What the fuck? Before I finished my words, I felt something grab my hand and yank me. My right hand grabbed the edge of the tub and I managed to stop myself before I got pulled inside the water. Whatever had a hold of my left hand was not letting go, and it continued to attempt to pull me. I resisted, the black water splashing up everywhere, causing beads of darkness to cover the bathroom. I pulled my arm and then I heard a pop. I let out a scream as a sharp pain exploded from my left shoulder. The old lady called out, asking me if I was okay, but I continued to cry in pain. Whatever was inside this pitch black water was going to take my arm off. I managed to prop a leg onto the edge of the bathtub and push with it, giving me enough strength to slowly pull my arm up. I clutched on my slumped left arm with my right and pulled. A wave of relief hit me when I saw my hand, but it turned to pure terror when I saw a thin, bony hand grasping mine. The other hand, still grasping mine, came up and emerged from the water as an arm, shoulder, then the face of an old man. His face was bloated. He stared at me with empty gray eyes, and his mouth was open in a silent scream. I called out for help, and when I turned to look out the door, I saw the old lady staring towards us in fear. "Robert? My Robert?" she muttered under her breath. The old man's gaze shifted towards the lady, and he let go of my hand to reach towards her. I stumbled backwards and slammed into the bathroom sink. The lady shuffled towards the bathtub and she called out to him. "I'm so sorry, Robert. I couldn't hear you call out to me. I couldn't hear you drain." She slowly outstretched both her arms and the old man grabbed them. Before I knew it, she was pulled so violently. She made a loud thud as her legs hit the edge of the tub. She didn't have a chance to scream as she was quickly submerged inside the black water. The water bubbled and then silence. Slowly the water sank through the drain and eventually all the pitch black water disappeared. When I asked the genie for a companion animal that would live as long as I would, and that would be loyal, cuddly, and as sweet as any other pet, I felt smug imagining a puppy that would easily live 50 years by my side. Imagine my horror when I opened my eyes to find a wide-eyed, big-eared, sweet, and adorable baby Virginia possum sitting in my lap, staring up at me with love. And with that, our time together is coming to an end. As always, I'd like to thank the writers who let me read their stories this evening. Each one of you did an amazing job building on a chilling story. I do hope you enjoyed listening to these as well, and ended your night on a scary note. Please remember to stay safe this Halloween night. Now, if you like this video, hit that like button and make sure it feels it. If you're new, please subscribe and turn that pretty little bell to all notifications. You also can share with anyone who might enjoy this content. And of course, I would love a comment using Spooky Night so I know you got this far. If you'd like to help in other ways and get early access, I have Patreon and YouTube memberships for that. And if you'd like to do a one-time donation, I have PayPal and Buy Me a Coffee as well. All the links are down below, including the ones to my socials and website. Happy Halloween!